My favorite time of the year has finally arrived as Dana White Contender Series kicks off this Tuesday with 10 straight weekends of events where we got 5 fights on every card with fighters vying for a UFC contract, usually bringing some highlight reel knockouts, some big upsets, and a lot of entertainment, but also many betting opportunities that we will be taking advantage of and hopefully having another profitable season. Now, Contender Series is usually some of my bigger videos that I do all year, as it seems to draw a lot of attraction, a lot of attention, and I appreciate everybody that's been watching the videos, coming back to the channel as well for the Contender Series. But I have one big goal for the year, and that is to crack 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, and I'm about 1,100 away, just about 1,000 subscribers away. So if you haven't hit the subscribe button already, you will be doing your boy a huge favor, especially with 10 straight weekends weeks, I should say, of Contender Series breakdowns coming your way, not to mention all the other promotions that I cover on the YouTube channel. But if you haven't hit subscribe on the YouTube page, please do so. I'm hoping to hit that 10,000 mark, even before the Contender Series wraps up this year. So I would greatly appreciate it if you guys can do that from jump. This segment does have timestamps as well. So if you want to just flip through right to the fights, I completely understand, but I quickly want to plug the MMA Fight Archive, because if you enjoy doing research on your own and want to see what to expect from these fighters that are trying to get a UFC contract, most people don't really know who some of these guys are, but the MMA Fight Archive ensures you know exactly what to expect when they step foot inside the cage on Tuesdays, as we have as many direct links as you could possibly find on the web for all of these fighters, so you can make some solid predictions and breakdowns yourself. A ton of people use it. Even commentators for the Contender Series utilize this service. Make sure you guys check it out. The MMA Fight Archive, 7-day free trial available for you. Check out over the 5,500, 5,600 fighter profiles we have on there. But again, the Contender Series is really where the MMA Fight Archive shines, and utilize the 7-day free trial, and you can see for yourself why it is worth the bang for its buck and why we have over 120 subscribers on this service as well. All right. Contender Series, week 1. We got a few familiar names on the card, not to mention some standout prospects. I really can't wait to get into this season, but we got to start with week 1, so let's get right into it. First matchup up, Christopher Ewert coming in at -170, going up against Yuri Panferov, who comes in at +140. Now, Ewert is a name that some people may recognize, as he had that unfortunate circumstance back at the ending of June where he accepted a short notice replacement matchup to make his UFC debut against Jackson McVeigh. Unfortunately, he egregiously was overweight during fight week, so they decided to pull him from the card, and there was going to be some concern whether he would be able to get back onto the Contender Series, because he was already scheduled to fight Yuri Panferov on this card. Luckily for him, the UFC has decided to give him that opportunity, and now he can showcase why he deserves to be on the biggest stage of the game. He comes from the Fury FC scene. This Chilean fighter is pretty much a slugger, loves to throw down in the pocket, throwing big haymakers, loves to mix it up in the combinations, and he does a decent job in terms of applying his defensive grappling so that he can keep fights in a realm where he feels most comfortable. Obviously, fighters that are better in the grappling realm might be able to take advantage of him, as he's still only 7-0 in his career and hasn't really fought a strong wrestler that could exploit that hole in his game. But from what I've been seeing, decent takedown defense, good get-ups, and then gets right back on the pressure in terms of the power and combinations in which he throws with. Now he's going up against Yuri Panferov, who is looking to make good on his second opportunity on the Contender Series, as 2 seasons ago he took on Torres Finney on the last card of the season and ultimately got ragdolled and submitted in the second round of that matchup. He's managed to bounce back with 2 regional wins in the CES promotion, but they were against mediocre competition. You know, a regional veteran like Rocky Edwards, who was 12-10 at the time, and a decent fighter in Bestayev, who I actually believe is a former Contender Series competitor as well. But stylistically speaking, those were matchups that were made for Panferov in terms of being able to get his takedowns, smothering opponents from the top position, and seeking those submissions or finishing opportunities. And that's what he's good at. You know, he throws some big shots on the feet, but it's really the takedowns and the top control that he applies against his opponents that have made him so successful and showcased why he has such a solid record. He He went 5-0 as an amateur. He's now 8-1 as a pro, with his only loss coming to Torres Finney, who was just, a tough stylistic matchup for anybody. Now he gets a second crack in the Contender Series, but I think, unfortunately for him, he's going up against a guy that may have good enough takedown defense to force him to slug it out, and I just don't think he's the better slugger here, as Ewert throws with a little bit more power, has a little bit better durability as well, and I think that's going to force Panferov into these pocket exchanges where he's going to end up getting clipped and possibly put away. Now, I'm not overly confident on the Ewert side at -170, is if Panferov is the best wrestler that he's gone up against, maybe Panferov could have the success that I've kind of laid out where, if somebody is to have success against Ewert, it would come with the wrestling and the grappling. Panferov could do that. But from what I've been seeing and kind of what I'm feeling in this matchup, I think Ewert might get taken down, but he should work back to his feet immediately. And then from there, I get back on the pace, pressure, and power striking. And I think that will lead to Ewert finding that knockout probably by the second round. All right, very fun fight here between George Mangos coming in at -110, going up against Radley De Silva, who's also coming in at -110. This is a pick-em matchup between two guys that have shown solid dominance throughout their runs in their respective regional promotions. Now, I'll start off on the Australian side of things with Mangos, who went 6-0 as an amateur and is now 7-0 as a pro. He's one of the brighter prospects to come out of Australia, given he's finished every single one of his opponents from the amateur to the pro ranks. He's very slick with his BJJ approach, often getting the back of his opponents and sinking in the rear naked choke. But we've even seen him pull off a flying triangle to defend his title, or I believe it was to win his title for Hex, and he would go on to defend it 3 more times after that, finishing every single opponent. Now, in that matchup where he pulled off the flying triangle, he was getting kind of controlled by a better wrestler who was able to keep him on the mat and do some good damage from on top, but Mangos did not give up on himself. He did a good job in terms of, providing some resistance, throwing up some submissions, and then finally throwing up that flying triangle to force the tap from his opponent and win the title that night. I think at his best, he mixed up his Muay Thai with his grappling and then tries to get opponents to the ground and get to those submission positions. But I wonder how he's going to fare against guys that will be able to keep him on his back and nullify his BJJ approach, which is obviously quite aggressive. Now, he's going up against Radley De Silva, who trains in British Columbia, BC, Canadian fighter. I don't really follow Battlefield Fight League that closely, but he was a champion over there, defended the title a couple times. His earlier fights mainly look like him utilizing his physicality and his wrestling to kind of nullify opponents up against the cage, drag them to the ground, and just show very heavy top pressure until he could work to positions where he could either find a finish or even just control them for the rest of the round and rinse and repeat. But his last 3 wins have been very dominant and very exciting as well. Those were his 3 title defenses, and he finished all 3 of those opponents, including a nasty spinning heel kick knockout over Drake Randall, I believe, in his second last matchup. He showcases a flashy capoeira style of striking early in fights, or at least early in rounds, I should say, and all of that is usually either to obviously find the knockout, but if he can't find the knockout, he utilizes that explosive movement to get in on very strong takedowns, and then he's able to get in on double legs, get his opponents to the ground, and apply his top pressure, which is usually very heavy and tough to deal with for a lot of fighters. Looks to have good cardio. He's done it for 25 minutes in the past, but obviously, the Canadian MMA scene, not usually the toughest and not the most, it's tough to gain the experience on the Canadian regional scene and then try to make it to the UFC and have major success. That's why not a lot of guys have really been successful in terms of doing that. But De Silva seems to have the athleticism, the explosivity, and I think that's going to be the difference maker here against Mangos. Now, Mangos, technically speaking, might be superior. I think he has slicker BJJ. I think his striking is it's a little bit more basic, but it's more technical and it's a little bit better in terms of just landing straight down the pipe. But I think it's going to be the athleticism and the physicality of De Silva that will ultimately end up making the difference here. I think this is going to keep Mangos often in the defensive position, and he'll be able to land damage from those defensive positions, whether it's moving backwards or even fighting off his back. But unless he catches De Silva in a submission or he catches him with a big shot to put him away, I think this will look optically like the Canadian is going to be the one that's in control, whether it's with his explosive striking or that top pressure. The thing that gives me some issues here in terms of having ultimate confidence on the Canadian side of things is the circumstances around the Contender Series, right? You want to go out there and you want to have an exciting performance. You want to have an exciting highlight reel finish, and that might pull out some weird things from De Silva where he might be a little bit more uncomfortable rather than looking to get to his grappling where he might be able to stay safe against Mangos. Tough fight to call. And I'm going to say it right off the bat here. I do not put any bias in these breakdowns just because I'm Canadian. I've had somebody call me out for it before, saying I'm picking Canadians just because I'm Canadian. I don't do that. I look at the fights, look at the fighters, look at the stylistic matchup, see how they match up against each other, and try to steer you guys in the direction that I'm seeing is the correct way to go. And in this matchup, I really think it's the physicality and athleticism of De Silva that's going to cause Mangos a ton of trouble in terms of getting off on his own offense. Will I bet it? Probably not, unless De Silva becomes a bigger underdog or something like that. But in terms of a prediction, I'm going to go De Silva, and I think he's going to end up reverting to his grappling and his strong top pressure, and it may not earn him a contract, but it will likely earn him a win here unless he strays from that game plan and just gets a little bit too chaotic where Mangos might be able to capitalize there. So tough fight to call. I completely understand why it's a pick 'em price, but I'm going to go De Silva here, and I think he wins this fight on the scorecards. All right. Next up, we got Basinger Susurkaev coming in at minus 300, going up against Murtaza Talha, who comes in at plus 240. Now, Susurkaev is stepping in on somewhat short notice. Now, I think he's had a couple weeks to prepare for this fight, but very exciting prospect, undefeated, showcasing great striking. He came up in the ACA promotion, ACA Young Egos, which is kind of like their, LFA of the ACA, essentially on the Russian side of things. And then he took a bunch of time off. He took off about 2.5 years between March 2022 and November 2024. And then he returned, but stateside. He joined Killcliff FC. He debuted for Baroka MMA, which I think was one of those newer promotions. Faced his toughest test because up until that point, he had knocked out everybody in the first round. 4 of those 6 first wins were under 60 seconds as well. So he usually got his work done pretty quickly. But his first fight on North American soil was a lot tougher for him, but he still made it look quite good. He had to deal with some takedowns. He got taken down a few times, but did a great job in terms of getting back into either reversal position or was able to get back to his feet. And then from there started utilizing his striking advantage and really hurting his opponents, going on to win that fight on the scorecards. Then he followed it up against in the Fury FC promotion, where he was able to stop a takedown heavy approach from his opponent, bust him up on the feet, and then eventually get a second round finish. And that's where he does his best work, is the striking room. And his defensive grappling looks good enough that, he's going to cause some of these wrestlers some trouble. And then once he gets them to start striking with them, he's going to be able to take advantage of those guys. And I think we could see that on display here against Murtaza Talha, who's getting his second opportunity on the Contender Series after falling short against Rodolfo Bellato back in 2023. Now, that was a fight where he came in as a 6-0 fighter, undefeated, 12-0 as an amateur as well. But he was coming off of a year-long layoff going into that Bellato fight because he had torn his ACL, had to go through the injury, rehab, all of that stuff. And then his next fight was for the Contender Series. Couldn't get off on much success in the first round, although 2 judges did score that first round in his favor. But then it seemed like his cardio hit a wall, and Bellato was able to pick up the slack there, pick up the pressure, and eventually force the finish there at the ending of the second round. Now, Talha is a guy that normally looks to implement his wrestling right away. He wants to take opponents to the ground. He wants to smash them from that top position, get that finish ASAP. But if he can't, then he's forced to strike. And his striking game is mainly just throwing a lot of big power shots. And if he's unable to produce a knockout, he's kind of just swinging at air and emptying his gas tank a lot quicker than he should, rather than looking to just, put together a jab and a cross or something, be a little bit more methodical, because he just wants to get fights to the ground as soon as possible. Now, he did manage to bounce back after that Bellator loss about 1.5 years later when he took on a pretty much a scrub. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt. He was scheduled to fight somebody on that card that's actually fighting on the Contender Series this season, but that opponent pulled out last minute. They pulled up a 0-4 scrub to just keep Talha busy, and it took him about a minute and a half to dispose of his opponent. Again, the other thing about Talha here also, notoriously a 205er, he's actually going down to 185 pounds now. So I'm curious to see how that's gonna translate for him, whether his strength will hold up at 185 pounds and if it becomes a bigger positive for him and strength against other guys, because he wants to take these guys to the ground, smother them from that top position, and do what he does best. But I think he's going to struggle to do that here against Susurkaev. I think Susurkaev will, maybe get taken down a few times, but I think he'll promptly work back to his feet. That's going to cause Talha to start slowing down, and that's where we see Susurkaev start to get off on his striking, land his big shots, and I think that eventually leads to Susurkaev getting that second or third round knockout victory as Talha starts to slow down. It's hard to have ultimate confidence at minus 300 on Susurkaev, considering that, Talha coming down to 185 pounds, this will easily be the toughest test of Susurkaev's career. I think he's well equipped for it. He's been training at Killcliff FC, training with Chimaev and Sarukian over the last couple of weeks, so he might be able to peak around the same time as Chimaev this week. I think it's just a striking advantage that's going to cause Talha a lot of trouble. So I'm going to go with Susurkaev, probably round 2 or round 3 knockout. All right, next up, fun fight here between Ty Miller, who comes in at minus 185, and Jimmy Drago, who comes in at plus 155. Now, I originally came across Ty Miller last year when he made his LFA debut and delivered a nasty 45-second knockout victory. This kid's he's tall, he's long, comes from a boxing background as well, utilizes great combinations, has some good Muay Thai skills too, where he utilizes good knees and head kicks, but it's really his ability to manage range and pick opponents apart from distance with his precision striking style. Trains at Fit NHB in New Mexico alongside Tim Means, and you kind of see some of that Tim Means style of striking. Not as many elbows and nasty cutting elbows that the Dirty Bird is known to use, but very hard-nosed striking style. 5-0 thus far. He's a talented striker. He's a talented fighter. My only qualm is that I feel like this might be a little bit too early for him to jump into the UFC. He's still quite young, still needs more experience, but from what I've been seeing, his takedown defense is holding up to a certain extent. I think stronger grapplers could give this guy a problem, but as long as he keeps fighting the striking realm, he's going to be very tough to deal with. He's very good with his combinations, distance management, countering opponents, footwork. This kid has it all. It just comes down to continuing to improve the defensive grappling aspect of his game, because then he's going to be a real trouble for a lot of opponents. But I just want to see him get more experience. Now, luckily for him, he's fighting a guy here in Jimmy Drago that I think is a good matchup for Miller. But let's dig into Drago a little bit more first. I do want to say I made a Fight Archive profile for Drago when he last fought for CFFC. Going into that, he had largely fought for Ring of Combat, which is I believe a New York-based promotion, and they had all of his fights on YouTube. But now it seems like they set them to private, so nobody can watch his fights from Ring of Combat. And I don't know if that was Drago's doing in terms of just not allowing his opponent to see what he's working with, or if that was the promotion just doing, I've seen other promotions do this when fighters make it to the Contender Series, most notably Demo Fight from Brazil. They did it for Eduardo Moura. They did it for a couple other fighters as well. But it's very weird that Ring of Combat did it for Drago here. But there's still enough out there to kind of put together the puzzle of what he brings to the table. He largely seems to be a striker that utilizes a ton of movement, good combination, good kicking game. His grappling is, improving. His last loss, I believe, came by rear naked choke, where he constantly had to deal with the guy trying to take him down. He showed good takedown defense and grappling defense for about 2.5 rounds until his opponent finally got him down in the third round, got his back, and quickly got the rear naked choke after that. He has tried to use offensive grappling his own in his last match in CFFC, and it didn't look the most impressive. He was struggling to get the takedown. He was doing some good clinch work, but it doesn't seem like he has that great of a offensive wrestling game. I think he feels most comfortable when he can throw his combinations and let his striking go. Unfortunately for him, I think he's just fighting a tougher striker. Miller, longer, taller, slicker with the striking, good counter striker. I think when Drago tries to crash the pocket here and get off on his combinations, he's going to be eating a combination of his own. If Miller's durability holds up, which I think it will, I think he's going to, land some big shots on Drago here, and I think that could eventually lead to Miller getting that knockout victory. Again, the hold up for me here with Miller, and again, this is going to be odds dependent on whether I end up pulling the trigger on the kid, is the lack of experience. I think Drago has 15 or 16 total MMA fights. Ty Miller has, I think, 8 or 9. So it's not a big experience advantage for Drago, but Drago has fought tougher competition than what Ty Miller has fought. But Ty Miller has gone out there and done what he's supposed to do against some of these guys. Although I will say, Miller's early fights, like his CFFC fights against guys like Eric Nolan, really tested his grappling game, and he came out on top. So, I don't want to completely shit on Miller's lack of experience, but I think that experience will help him, especially if he ends up making it to the UFC. He's going to be thrown in there with some very tough competition and guys that might be able to take advantage of his grappling holds that he still might have in his game. But in this specific matchup against Drago, I think Miller is the better striker. I think he has a little bit more pop on his shots, and I think that will eventually lead to him getting that knockout victory over Dreamy Drago. So give me Ty Miller and Ty Miller by knockout. All right, that brings us to our main event of the Week 1 Contender Series card, and it goes down between Ilian Bouafia, who comes in at minus 260, and Nemius Santana, who comes in around that plus 220 range. Now, Bouafia, slick striker. This guy loves his left hand from the southpaw position, but that often leaves him kind of just waiting a little bit too long, and better strikers could make him pay for that low volume approach. However, he's 6-0 thus far, finished, I believe, all but one of his opponents. And that one fighter that he was unable to put away was the guy that was able to provide the most amount of resistance. And a lot of that had to do in the clinch, the grappling, the wrestling. And we saw some good work from Ilian that night, getting back to his feet in a timely manner, finding off some of the takedowns, and then even getting to some grappling of his own early on in that fight. But if he had it his way, this guy would strike the entire time. The only issue is his volume is a little bit of a concern. He's a training partner of Nasruddin Imavov, and you see similar striking patterns from those guys. But again, for Ilian, a lot of it is just moving around at range, staying at range, and then just looking for those moments to blitz and land that straight left down the pipe. I would love to see him utilize his jab a little bit more. He throws it in every now and then, but, again, a lot of his game is just treading around at distance and waiting for that opportunity to explode and land that straight left down the pipe. And if he's unable to get the knockout, as he continues to face tougher competition, he might start finding himself behind on the scorecards because he's just not landing often enough, and he's trusting the power in his hands a little bit too much. Some of the guys most of the guys he's faced on the regional scene were guys that he was easily able to land on and get out of there. His first pro fight took place back in 2021, and we saw him get hurt that night. So there are maybe some defense issues in terms of just being so trusting in that left hand. Again, outside of the one fight that he went to the scorecards in that first fight where he got hurt, he's pretty much been in the driver's seat for a lot of these matchups. And I think his height has a lot to do with it too. He's 6'5", tall, lanky fighter. And the other thing to really take into consideration going into this fight will be taking place at 185 pounds. This is not a weight that Ilian has made in over 3 years. He's largely been fighting at 195. I think he even fought at 205 at a certain point. I could be off on that, but he has not made 185 pounds, at least according to Tapology, since 3 years ago. So, I think he's a professional. I think he'll make the weight. I don't think he'll have too much issue there, but I wonder if that might have some sort of an impact on this fight. But again, straight lefts, movement, straight lefts. That's all this guy really brings to the table. He utilizes his rear kicks sometimes to throw teep kicks up the middle, but it's really about that power hand for him and trying to line up that big shot to get his opponents out of there. Now, he's fighting a scrappy Brazilian prospect here who trains under former UFC fighter Lucas Martins, trains alongside guys like Kevin Vallejos and Thaleson Teixeira, has a 7-2-1 record, very gangly for this weight class. He's 6'2", but like his upper body, he's kind of built like Curtis Blades in a sense, where he's just very top heavy and he has a long reach. And I think that helps him generate a ton of power, which is why he's finished 6 of his 7 opponents by knockout, or 6 of his his 7 victories by knockout, and that other one coming by submission. But this is a guy that stays very active with the leg kicks from distance, and then once he gets the timing and distance down, he crashes the pocket with big combinations and is able to land those big shots on his opponents and put them away. He fought a very tall and lanky opponent in his second last matchup and showcased an ability to switch stances and find his way into the pocket where he can get off on big shots, even engaging in the clinch and letting go with nasty elbows. But ultimately, it was a nasty elbow on the ground that clearly put his opponent away, knocking him out stiff. I really think Ilian is the favorite in this matchup because of his undefeated record. If you look at Santana's record and just kind of skim it, you're not like overly impressed. But when you really dig into his tape and see what kind of power this guy packs and the style in which he tries to implement it, he seems like a live dog. You know, I don't want to take anything away from Ilian, but again, his lack of output, if he can't land that big shot on Santana, and Santana looks like he has damn good durability, this could be a rough night for Ilian, especially if Santana, well, I don't think Santana will be overly successful if he looks to take a grapple-heavy approach. I think his key is going to stay busy with the leg kick, force that pocket exchange from Ilian, and then land his big power and try to get Ilian out of there that way. I will also say, I think Santana could easily be on a 7-fight winning streak as of now. The fight that he lost by split decision, I thought it was one that he should have won. I thought it was I want to say mostly clear decision in his favor. And then the draw that he had against the guy that he just beat last time around in their rematch, I thought he won that fight. You know, he suffered a nasty cut, I believe, in the second round. But outside of that, he was the one landing more damage and being more effective. But somehow that fight ended up being scored a draw, which makes no sense. So, you know, his record could look a lot sexier should a couple bounces have gone his way, which they should have. So I think, you know, we should take advantage of this underdog here because I don't think Ilian has fought a guy like this before. I think he's going to struggle to implement his range, as I think Santana's just gangly reach and gangly style of just throwing strikes is going to eventually counter Bouafia here and lead to a possible finish. So, yeah, it's tough to pass over Santana around that plus 210, plus 220 mark, as I think this will be Ilian's toughest test. Santana is more active, can crack harder, and if his durability holds up, he could be the one that ends up landing the knockout here. So I'm going to go with the upset in the main event here. I'm going to go Nemaias Santana by knockout, and hopefully cashing a solid underdog ticket there. All right. There you guys go. First Contender Series broken down for the season. Very happy to get this under my belt here. Tuesdays will usually be the day that I drop these breakdowns for you guys. Was a little bit busy, so it got kind of pushed later into Sunday, but I hope to have it usually by like Sunday afternoon for you guys. That means the MMA Lawcast for upcoming UFC events will be pushed to Mondays, so I'll be dropping my UFC 319 breakdown for you guys tomorrow evening. Stay tuned for that. PFL this week as well. That will come out probably Wednesday or Thursday. And then we also have LFA going down this week, which I'll drop on Thursday. So a ton of fights to talk about this whole week. Again, hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Check out the Lock of the Night Patreon page if you guys want more content, track plays, official plays, all that stuff. We've been absolutely tearing it up as of late. Show your boys some support, even just by hitting that subscribe button on the YouTube channel. That'll be greatly appreciated. All right. Appreciate the love. Appreciate the support. I'll see you guys again tomorrow for the UFC 319 full card breakdown. See you guys then. Peace.